What if I told you the Los Angeles Lakers just lost the one man who defined this franchise for nearly a decade, and almost nobody saw it coming until the day it actually happened? What if I told you that in the wreckage of that shocking exit, a single name started spreading through NBA circles so fast that fans on both coasts started refreshing their phones every few minutes, praying it was true? A 23-year-old former number 1 pick. A kid who has spent 3 straight seasons getting his heart broken in the first round of the playoffs. A player who just told the world, in his own words, that losing early is no longer acceptable. His name is Paolo Banchero. And somehow, impossibly, his name is now tangled up with the Los Angeles Lakers. Stay with me because this story has more twists than anyone expected, and by the end, you're going to understand exactly why this rumor exploded the way it did, and what could really happen next. Think about that for a second. An entire fan base, spread across the world, woke up one morning to discover the identity of their team had just changed overnight. No warning banner. No countdown clock. Just a headline that hit phones at the exact same moment, from Los Angeles to Manila to London, and a wave of disbelief that followed right behind it. Some fans refused to believe it at first. Others had a strange, sinking feeling they'd seen this coming for months and just didn't want to admit it. And in the middle of all that confusion, one name kept climbing to the top of every search bar, every comment section, every group chat: Paulo Banchero. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand exactly why that name, of all names, became the center of this entire storm. Let's rewind for a second because to understand how big this moment is, you need to understand what the Lakers just lost, and just how strange this entire offseason has already been. For 8 years, the purple and gold jersey belonged to one man. He arrived in Los Angeles as the most famous basketball player alive, and he leaves as the greatest scorer the sport has ever seen. Think back to that surreal, empty arena bubble season, players sealed off from the rest of the world, games played in front of nothing but cardboard cutouts and piped-in crowd noise, and somehow, in the middle of all that eeriness, he led that Lakers team to a championship anyway. It remains one of the strangest, most unforgettable title runs the league has ever produced, and he was the one steering the ship through it. From there, the story only got more remarkable. He kept playing at an elite level well into his late 30s, an age when most legends are long retired, coaching from a broadcast booth or coaching their kids' AAU teams. He broke the NBA's all-time scoring record, a mark that once seemed untouchable, held for decades by a man who dominated an entirely different era of the sport. He kept climbing past 38,000 points, then further, adding to a total no one had ever imagined a human being reaching. And then came the moment that turned an already legendary career into something almost mythical: his own son, drafted into the league, stepping onto an NBA court to play alongside him. Fathers and sons had crossed paths in league history before, playing for different teams in different eras, but never like this. Never in the same starting 5, wearing the same jersey, sharing the same huddle. For 8 seasons, when people thought Lakers, they thought of him first, and for a brief, magical stretch, they thought of his son standing right beside him too. And then this summer, it ended. Not with a trade. Not with a farewell tour. It ended with a phone call. Picture it. It's late June. The free agency period is about to open. Executives around the league are pacing their offices, waiting for 6 o'clock Eastern Time, the moment teams can legally start talking to free agents. Everybody assumes this is a formality. Everybody assumes the greatest player of his generation is going to run it back one more time in Los Angeles. Maybe even bring his other son into the fold eventually, finish what feels like an unfinished story. Instead, his agent picks up the phone and delivers the news directly to one of the most connected reporters in basketball. The message is simple and final. He is not coming back. He has told the Lakers they can move forward without him, because he is going to play somewhere else for his 24th season. Understand something about this particular summer. This wasn't just any ordinary free agency period. Across the league, dozens of players were about to hit the open market at the same time, a genuine wave of movement bigger than almost anything the NBA had seen in years. Insiders were already calling it one of the most unpredictable free agent classes in recent memory, with as many as 20 notable players potentially switching teams before training camp even opened. Amid all of that chaos, all of that uncertainty rippling through front offices everywhere, the single biggest domino of all was this one decision. Everyone was watching to see where it would fall. Nobody, not even the most plugged-in insiders, could say for certain until that phone call actually happened. 24th season. Let that sink in for a moment. This man has been playing professional basketball since some of the people watching this video weren't even born yet, and he still has enough left in the tank that teams across the league are lining up to get him. Within minutes, the Lakers front office released a statement. It was warm. It was respectful. The team's governor thanked him for 8 years of history, for the championship banner he helped raise, for the records he broke wearing that jersey. She said he would always be a part of the Lakers family. He responded publicly, thanking the franchise, saying it had been an honor to wear the colors and try to add to the legacy that came before him. It read like a clean goodbye. A mutual, respectful parting after nearly a decade together. But here's the thing about clean goodbyes in the NBA. They almost never stay clean for long. Because the second a superstar becomes a free agent, especially one of this magnitude, an entire ecosystem of speculation kicks into gear. Teams start calling. Rumors start swirling. Everyone wants a piece of the story. The Golden State Warriors, his rumored suitor, watched one of their own stars turn down a player option, freeing up cap space and creating a domino effect that had insiders buzzing about a reunion between two aging former teammates who once shared a championship roster. Front office sources said the Warriors hadn't been given any clear signal that they were the frontrunner. Other insiders speculated about Philadelphia. Speculation is a wildfire in this league, and it spreads whether or not anyone actually knows the truth. And in the end, it was Philadelphia that landed him. A short-term deal. Modest, by his standards, especially compared to the money he once commanded. But it didn't matter what the number was. What mattered was the shockwave it sent through Los Angeles. For the first time since he arrived, the Lakers were no longer his team. So now put yourself in the shoes of the Lakers front office on that morning. You built an entire era around one player. He is gone. You already have a superstar on the roster, a brilliant young playmaker who came over in one of the most surprising trades in recent memory, a generational talent who can score from anywhere on the floor and see passes other players don't even know exist. But even the brightest young star needs another star next to him if you want to compete for a championship. One great player is a highlight reel. Two great players is a contender. So the front office starts working the phones. General Manager Rob Pelinka, a man who has built a reputation for aggressive, sometimes shocking roster moves, immediately starts exploring the trade and free agency market. Reports start swirling about targets. A promising young center from a rival franchise. A physical, high-energy big man coming off a career year in Toronto. These are solid names, useful pieces, but none of them scream championship centerpiece. None of them replace the aura, the gravity, the sheer star power that just walked out the door. And that's exactly the moment when one name started echoing louder than any other in Lakers chatter. Paulo Banchero. If you don't follow the Orlando Magic closely, let me paint the picture of who this young man actually is, because his story matters here. Rewind back to draft night, a stage packed with hopeful prospects in sharp suits, families squeezing hands under the table, waiting for a single name to be called. When the commissioner walked to the podium and announced Paolo Banchero as the first overall pick, nobody in the building was surprised. He had spent his lone college season looking like a problem nobody could solve, a massive frame combined with footwork and ball handling that belonged to a player half his size, the kind of skill set scouts love to describe as point forward, a guy who could bring the ball up, create for others, then turn around and bully his way to the rim against anyone foolish enough to guard him one-on-one. Orlando had been rebuilding quietly for years by that point, stacking up lottery picks, absorbing a lot of losing seasons, waiting patiently for a true foundational piece to finally arrive. Banchero looked like exactly that. He won Rookie of the Year almost immediately, beating out a stacked class of fellow first-year players. He kept climbing every season after that, adding a reliable jumper, tightening up his defense, learning how to close out tight games instead of just piling up gaudy stats and blowouts. He made an all-star team. Fans in Orlando finally had something they hadn't had in years. Hope, real hope, built around a player who looked like a genuine franchise cornerstone, someone worth building an entire decade around. But hope in the NBA has an expiration date if it isn't followed by results. And for 3 straight seasons now, Orlando's playoff runs have ended the exact same brutal way. First round. Every single year. This past postseason might have been the most painful of all. Banchero dropped 38 points in a win-or-go-home Game 7, an incredible individual performance, the kind of night superstars are made of, and it still wasn't enough. The Magic lost to Detroit anyway, eliminated in the first round for the 3rd consecutive year. Picture Banchero in that locker room after the final buzzer. Sweat still dripping. Legs completely empty after 42 minutes of playing his heart out. Reporters crowding around him, and someone asks the obvious question, is this team good enough to take the next step? And his answer isn't the usual coach speak, the usual, we'll be back next year, cliché. He's honest. Painfully honest. He basically says that based on the last 3 years, the answer is no. Not yet. Not the way things currently stand. That kind of quote doesn't just disappear into the ether. In a league obsessed with drama, a young superstar publicly questioning whether his own team is good enough to win is the kind of spark that ignites an entire summer's worth of speculation. Almost immediately, insiders start floating his name in trade packages. Not just to the Lakers, but all over the league. There's chatter connecting him to Phoenix, where a defensive-minded new coaching staff is remaking the culture and could use another do-it-all scorer next to their all-star guard. There's chatter connecting him to Chicago, a franchise desperately searching for a new face after an organizational shakeup. There's even chatter connecting him to Milwaukee in a wild, complicated scenario involving a disgruntled 2-time MVP who wants out, with some voices around the league suggesting Orlando could be a serious suitor in a deal that would send Banchero the other way. So by the time LeBron actually left the Lakers, Banchero's name was already floating in the wind, already primed to attach itself to the next big storyline. And the next big storyline turned out to be the biggest vacancy in basketball, the identity of the Los Angeles Lakers. Here's where the fantasy really takes shape, and where you start to understand exactly why this rumor caught fire the way it did. Analysts started building out a hypothetical trade. On paper, some of the logic actually makes sense, and that's exactly why it spread as fast as it did. Banchero is currently making significantly less money than a max-level superstar. He's already established, already a walking bucket, already averaging monster numbers, and crucially, he's still only 23 years old, which means the Lakers would be trading for a player who is just entering his prime instead of watching one leave it. Compare that with a 41-year-old legend on an expiring deal, and you can see the appeal instantly. A team looking to build sustainably around their new franchise centerpiece would love to pair him with a rising star instead of chasing fading production. Then there's the roster fit question. Picture Banchero next to that same brilliant young playmaker who already runs the Lakers' offense. One handles the ball, sees the whole floor, creates for everyone around him. The other bulldozes his way to the rim, bullies smaller defenders in the post, and stretches just enough to knock down open jumpers. On a whiteboard, in a highlight reel, in a video game simulation, it looks incredible. It looks like exactly the kind of 1-2 punch that wins playoff series in April, May, and June. Of course, fantasy trades always need a matching piece to make the money work, and that's where things get uncomfortable for Lakers fans. The most talked about version of this scenario involves the Lakers giving up their sharpshooting, do-everything guard who has become a fan favorite over the past few seasons, a player who runs a ridiculous efficiency rating and has become one of the most versatile complementary pieces in the entire league. There have been rumblings that he wants a bigger, longer contract sooner rather than later, with just 1 more year remaining on his current deal. If the front office isn't sure it can afford to pay him what he wants long-term, suddenly trading him away for a younger, cheaper, higher-ceiling star doesn't sound so crazy after all. Painful for the fans who love watching him play, sure. But teams don't build championship rosters based on sentiment. They build them based on math, timelines, and cold, hard asset management. Now flip over to the Orlando side of this hypothetical, because this is where it gets interesting for a completely different reason. In these mock scenarios, sending Banchero away doesn't leave the Magic in ruins. It actually reshuffles the entire pecking order of that roster overnight. Suddenly Franz Wagner, already an excellent all-around wing, becomes the unquestioned number one option, the guy drawing every opposing defense's top perimeter defender every single night. Jalen Suggs, a combo guard known more for his defense and hustle plays than his shot creation, suddenly gets handed a much bigger role running the offense. Desmond Bane, a sharpshooter Orlando had already acquired to space the floor, becomes even more essential as a secondary scoring option. Analysts building out these scenarios openly describe it as a win for almost everyone involved on paper, a rare trade where both rosters theoretically get better in their own specific ways, at least in a vacuum, at least before you consider whether the Magic would actually want to blow up the very core they spent years carefully assembling. So there it is. The dream scenario. Banchero in purple and gold, forming a dynamic new duo with the Lakers' current franchise cornerstone, while Orlando rebuilds its pecking order around Wagner, Suggs, and Bane, banking on a mountain of draft capital and cap flexibility to fill in the rest. It's worth pausing here to notice just how fast this idea spread once the LeBron news broke. Sports talk shows debated it as a legitimate possibility within days. Fan forums lit up with fully drawn-out trade machines, users on both sides trying to make the money work under the league's complicated salary rules. Comment sections split right down the middle. Lakers fans were split between pure excitement at the idea of a brand new superstar duo and genuine heartbreak at the thought of losing a player they'd grown to love watching every single night. Magic fans were split between terror at the thought of losing their franchise cornerstone and quiet curiosity about what a Wagner-led, Suggs and Bane-supported roster could actually look like with a few extra first-round picks in the vault. For a solid stretch of the summer, this wasn't a fringe theory whispered in obscure corners of the internet. It was a genuine, mainstream conversation happening across major outlets, fueled by real financial logic and a real, gaping need on the Lakers roster. It's the kind of scenario that makes for an incredible headline. It's the kind of scenario that gets clipped, shared, and argued about for days. And for a few weeks this year, this exact idea genuinely spread across Lakers media, fantasy basketball circles, and NBA trade forums like wildfire. But now, let's slow down. Because a headline and reality are not always the same thing, and if you actually follow what Orlando has said and done, the picture becomes a lot more complicated. Let's start with the single biggest obstacle standing between this fantasy and reality, the Orlando Magic themselves. Insiders who cover the team closely have consistently pushed back on the idea that Orlando has any real appetite to move their franchise player. Even during the wildest stretch of Giannis Antetokounmpo trade speculation earlier this year, when it seemed like half the league was dreaming up packages to pry the former MVP away from Milwaukee, league sources specifically pointed to Banchero and his fellow young star as the exact reason Orlando wasn't seriously pursuing that blockbuster. In other words, the front office values its own core so highly that it wasn't willing to break it up even to acquire a two-time league MVP. That's not the profile of a team quietly shopping its franchise cornerstone to the Lakers. There's also a basketball reason why trading Banchero doesn't add up for Orlando. His game overlaps significantly with the other young star already occupying the front court, a smooth, do-it-all wing who has quietly become one of the most well-rounded two-way players in the league. Two big, long, ball-dominant forwards who both need touches, both need space, both thrive with the ball in their hands, sitting on the same roster, sharing the same minutes. It creates real questions about fit. But instead of using that overlap as a reason to trade Banchero away, most people around the organization see it as a puzzle to be solved through better roster construction, not through blowing up the core. Add shooting. Add defense. Surround the two of them with pieces that complement rather than compete for touches. That's the actual blueprint Orlando appears to be working from. And then there's Banchero himself. Remember that painfully honest quote from after the Game 7 loss, the one where he admitted the Magic haven't proven they're good enough yet? People heard that and assumed frustration, assumed a star ready to push his way out the door. But listen closer to what he said just weeks later, this summer, when asked directly about the year ahead. He didn't sound like a guy plotting his exit. He sounded like a guy plotting his revenge season. He talked about carrying a real sense of urgency into the new year. He talked about the sting of losing in the first round 3 years running, about how that feeling has stayed with him all summer. He talked about wanting to finally break through, to get his team out of that first-round graveyard and into the deep playoff run Orlando fans have been begging for since he arrived. That is not the language of a man secretly hoping his agent calls him with news of a trade to Los Angeles. That is the language of a franchise player digging in, doubling down, determined to be the one who finally changes the story in Orlando rather than abandon it. And it isn't just words. Look at what Orlando has actually been doing behind the scenes this summer, because actions tend to tell you more than quotes ever will. While this rumor was spreading across the internet, the Magic front office was quietly making moves that only make sense if you're planning to keep your core intact and build around it, not tear it apart. They've been working through summer league evaluating young depth pieces, testing out rookies and two-way prospects who could fill out the roster around their stars rather than replace them. There have been internal conversations about center depth, about locking down size next to Banchero and Wagner instead of clearing him out to make room for somebody else's superstar duo. Every single roster decision this organization has made since the season ended points toward addition, not subtraction. You don't draft depth pieces to support a frontcourt you're planning to trade away within the year. You draft them because you believe that frontcourt is your foundation for the next decade. Compare that to how a franchise actually behaves when it's genuinely shopping a star. There's usually a pattern. Contract extensions quietly stall. The player gets phased out of marketing campaigns. Front office executives start giving cagey, non-committal answers when reporters ask directly about his future. None of that has happened here. If anything, the opposite is true. Orlando has continued treating Banchero as the unquestioned face of the franchise, building this season's summer league roster and coaching staff decisions around the assumption that he's the centerpiece for years to come, not a trade chip on the way out the door. So where does that leave us? On one side, you have a juicy, headline-grabbing scenario built on real financial logic and real roster needs, a fantasy trade that genuinely started circulating in serious basketball media, not just random social media accounts. On the other side, you have an organization that has repeatedly signaled it isn't interested in moving its franchise cornerstone, a locker room culture built around him staying and fixing Orlando's postseason curse from the inside, and a player who just told the world, in his own words, that this upcoming season is about proving the doubters wrong, not running away from the challenge. That's the real tension at the heart of this story, and it's exactly why it's captured so much attention. It isn't a rumor built on nothing. It's a rumor built on a genuine, logical need, colliding head-on with a genuine, stated desire to stay and finish the job. Meanwhile, the Lakers haven't been sitting still waiting on a Banchero miracle. While this rumor was spreading, the front office was simultaneously chasing other names to fill the void left behind. There were reports linking them to a hard-nosed young center from Detroit, though sources close to that situation suggested the Pistons had already made him an extremely lucrative offer and had no interest in a sign-and-trade, which would make him very difficult to pry away. There were also reports connecting the Lakers to a physical forward coming off a breakout year in Toronto, a player who quietly put up excellent shooting numbers on both ends of the floor last season. There was chatter about a possible reunion trade involving a former Lakers champion currently on the Wizards roster, tied to conversations happening in the Warriors front office about their own pursuit of the very same free agent who just left Los Angeles behind. In other words, this front office is working every angle simultaneously. Banchero is one name in a constellation of possibilities, not a singular, confirmed target with a handshake deal waiting to be signed. That's an important distinction, because it's easy for a name like Banchero's, a young star already surrounded by trade speculation for entirely separate reasons, to get pulled into every rebuild conversation happening around the league this summer. Once a star's name starts trending in trade rumors for one reason, it tends to get attached to every major storyline within reach, whether or not there's any real substance behind the connection. So here's the honest truth sitting underneath all the noise. As of right now, there is no reported handshake agreement. No formal trade request. No indication from Orlando's front office that they are actively shopping their franchise player to Los Angeles or anyone else. What exists is a compelling piece of speculation, born from real financial logic, spreading through a media ecosystem that thrives on exactly this kind of tantalizing what. It caught fire because it makes sense on paper. It caught fire because the timing was perfect, arriving right as the Lakers were reeling from the biggest departure in franchise history. It caught fire because fans on both sides could picture it so vividly, they almost convinced themselves it was already happening. But here's what makes this story worth watching closely instead of dismissing outright. The NBA trade landscape can shift in an instant. Contracts extend. Patience runs out. A slow start to a fourth straight disappointing season could change the entire calculus in Orlando's front office by February. A disappointing start for the Lakers, still adjusting to life without their longtime centerpiece, could make ownership desperate enough to offer a package Orlando simply cannot refuse. Draft picks pile up. Timelines shift. The very same insiders who currently say Orlando isn't shopping Banchero could be saying something completely different 6 months from now, especially if this coming season ends in a fourth straight first-round exit and Banchero starts publicly wondering, out loud, whether Orlando is ever going to build the team around him that he deserves. That's the nature of this league. Nothing is ever really finished until it's finished. Rumors that seem dead in July can roar back to life in February. Front offices that insist they aren't listening to offers in the summer sometimes pick up the phone the moment things start going sideways. So where does this leave the Lakers, a franchise standing at the biggest crossroads it has faced in nearly a decade? Their all-time greatest player has walked out the door for the first time in 8 years. Their new franchise centerpiece is already in place, brilliant, dazzling, but still searching for the right partner to build a true contender around him. And out there in Orlando, a 23-year-old former number 1 pick just spent his whole summer promising the world he is going to break his team's brutal playoff curse, even while his name keeps getting whispered in trade rumors he never actually asked to be part of. Maybe nothing happens at all. Maybe Banchero leads Orlando on a deep playoff run this year, silences the rumors completely, and signs a long-term extension that keeps him in Florida for the rest of his prime, becoming the very symbol of loyalty that Magic fans have been dreaming about since the day he was drafted. Maybe the Lakers find their next star somewhere else entirely, through a totally different trade nobody saw coming, the same way nobody saw this summer's departure coming until the phone call actually happened. That's the beautiful, maddening thing about this league. The biggest stories rarely announce themselves in advance. They arrive in a single phone call, a single quote in a locker room, a single front office decision made behind closed doors that nobody outside that room even knew was being discussed. Or maybe, just maybe, if Orlando stumbles again this season, if that first-round curse claims a fourth straight victim, the conversation that started as a fantasy trade dreamed up by analysts in the middle of a quiet summer suddenly becomes something the Magic front office can no longer ignore. Patience in this league is not infinite. Front offices that insist a player is untouchable in July have been known to quietly start taking calls by February if the losing continues and a fan base starts growing restless. Nobody wants to admit that possibility out loud in the middle of an offseason built on optimism and summer league highlights, but everybody around the league knows it's true. It has happened before, to bigger stars than this, and it will happen again. Nobody knows for certain yet. That's exactly what makes this one of the storylines worth watching all season long. Keep an eye on Orlando's record through the first couple months of the season, because a hot start silences this entire rumor instantly, while a slow start throws gasoline right back onto it. Keep an eye on how Banchero talks about his team in post-game interviews if things start slipping again, because players almost always tell you the truth if you listen closely enough to the way they choose their words. Keep an eye on what the Lakers actually do with the extra cap space and trade flexibility they gained by losing their longtime superstar for nothing in return, because a front office sitting on that much financial freedom rarely stays quiet for long. And keep an eye on the trade deadline in February, historically the moment when whispered rumors either quietly die or suddenly, violently come true. Every single one of those threads could end up tying back to this exact rumor, the one that started as pure speculation dreamed up in the middle of a quiet summer and could, if enough dominoes fall the right way, become the biggest trade story of the entire NBA season. Or it could fade away completely, remembered only as one of dozens of fantasy trades that never actually happened, the kind of story that gets forgotten the moment training camp opens and real basketball takes over again. For now, all we have is a name, a motive, and a franchise standing at a genuine crossroads for the first time in nearly a decade. A young star in Orlando publicly vowing to break his own team's curse from the inside. A Lakers front office quietly working every angle it can find to build something new around its current cornerstone. And a rumor sitting right in the middle of it all, refusing to fully die, refusing to fully come true, just waiting for the next domino to fall. Because in this league, that's usually exactly how the biggest trades begin. Not with a press conference. Not with a done deal. But with a whisper, a fantasy scenario, a name that just won't stop trending until one single phone call turns it into reality or turns it into nothing at all. Only time, and this coming season, will tell us which one it's going to be.